The special board meeting is called to order. May we have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Dr. Bofi is absent. Mr. Davis?
Present.
Mr. Davis is present. Ms. Edmonston is not here yet. Mr. Garvey is on his way. Ms. Holloway? Present. Ms. Holloway is present. Dr. Jones?
Present.
Dr. Jones is present. Ms. Lewis?
Here.
Ms. Lewis is present. Ms. Orange Jones is absent. Mr. Rock?
Present.
Mr. Rock is present. Dr. Thomason?
Present.
Dr. Thomason is present. And Ms. Vautier? Here. Ms. Vautier is present. You do have a quorum.
I need a motion to approve the agenda, please.
Check.
Motion by Mr. Rock, approved by, seconded by Mrs. Holloway. Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. First item.
First item, consideration of possible amendments to the fiscal year 2017-18 minimum foundation program formula approved by BESE on March 8, 2017. It's on page 1.
Mr. Superintendent?
Thank you, and I might have this in a moment.
You need a motion?
We need a motion, I'm sorry.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Vautier, motion second by Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeff, I might just come up and just be here to answer questions as they come up.
You just turn your mics off.
Members, I'd like to just give you an overview, just a reminder of the process. There's an art to this. Members, I'd like to give you just an update on the process for where the MFP is, how it's created, and just give you a reminder of that because all of that has a bearing on all of this today. As you know, under the Constitution, your role in this process is to create the formula. The formula cannot be amended or edited by the legislature or by the governor. However, it does have to be approved as a resolution by both chambers in order for it to take effect. And if it is not approved by the legislature, then it just goes back to the previous formula. We, for the last couple of years, have not had a formula approved. In March, you approved a formula, you sent it over, and it has been analyzed by the legislature. And there have been multiple discussions in which Ms. CNO and Ms. Bentley and I and Ms. Davis and others have been involved. And one of the legislature's suggestions has been that based on data that we have provided them from the February 1 count, that special dispensation be made for districts that have been directly affected by events that are out of their control from an enrollment perspective, that are frankly likely to change over time. For example, certain parishes have had an effect that you can trace directly to, on their enrollment, you can trace directly to flooding as a result of the rain that occurred in August. Similarly, there is the potential of a large-scale deployment from Fort Polk to Iraq that we had not been aware of prior to the passage of this MFP, but that we've now been made aware of. And both events are events where you can imagine you have a temporary loss of population, only to find out a year later that that population has returned. People have returned from their deployments. Families have rebuilt their homes, and all of a sudden you will have had to go through a reduction in force in some of these school systems, only to have to come back next year and have to hire for these school systems. And so in providing those data, the House of Representatives advised us yesterday in the committee meeting that they would like us to review the formula, they'd like you to review the formula, and to create an environment in which this would not be a problem any longer for these specific instances. Also, however, we informed them that, or we said to them, do you have any other suggestions? And they did not give us any other suggestions. So there is no other element of the formula that we are proposing to touch. In other words, nothing you're doing today has any impact on anything that you did in March. All of this is just in addition to, it does not amend things we've done previously. Let me say one more thing because it might have a special bearing on the way that this story is reported. I know we have members of the governor's staff, members of the commissioner's staff here, and we have members of the media here. As the formula works its way through the legislature, the budget also works its way through the legislature. And in the ideal, these two documents are reconciled by the end of the process. However, in passing the formula effectively trumps the budget, meaning that when the formula is passed by the legislature, ultimately it must be funded, irrespective of what is in this budget. And remember, this is a $3.7 billion investment. That one little child that attends school or doesn't attend school changes. So out of 720,000 kids, you're never going to get the projection of exactly how many of those youngsters will show up in October and in February, right? And so it is almost always the case, that the legislature either over-appropriates or under-appropriates in a budget that they pass in June for the number of kids who show up in October and February. I actually give great credit, I know Ms. Schuler is here, to this administration for getting as much closer than has been the case in past administrations. What you're going to do today, if you vote to support this initiative, would add roughly $7 million to the projected size of the MFP. However, remember that even the projections are not necessarily accurate. And remember that $7 million, though it sounds quite large, is actually less than 0.5% of the overall MFP. The House of Representatives, when they passed their budget, their version of the budget, took out $18 million that you had effectively created. In their projection, they projected, no, we're not going to need those $18 million. That document, the budget, is now being considered by the Senate, and the Senate will certainly have to question three pieces of information. One, should we put back that $18 million in our projection? Two, were the governor's and the commissioner's original projections accurate for growth of student population and those things? And three, should we account in our budget for this $7 million? We are proposing that, irrespective of what the House of Representatives did in their budget, and irrespective of what the Senate does in their budget, you instead amend this document, and that we hope that the legislature conforms to this document, to this formula, with the knowledge that ultimately, even if they don't in this version of the budget, later on in the fiscal year they will have to, because the MFP formula, if passed, trumps House Bill 1, or ultimately the law, the budget, as passed. It must be funded. And what I'm saying to you today is that $7 million, which is what you're essentially discussing today, may seem significant. The truth of it is less than 0.5% of the overall MFP investment, and thus should not be a significant consideration relative to the extraordinary challenges that these districts could experience were we not to do this today. I recognize that's a bunch of moving pieces. Certainly happy to answer questions. Beth is here to answer questions as well, and look forward to your thoughts.
Mrs. Bocek?
I just have a couple of questions just from a procedural issue. I know, Cino, that you run simulations, or you've taken a look at which schools and/or districts would be affected by this emergency assistance. So could you tell us, first of all, which districts are we looking at specifically that would fall under the criteria that has been set up here, and then approximately how much money for those particular districts or schools?
Good morning, Betsy, with the department. Yes, the districts that have met the criteria include Livingston, The criteria yields about a $4.2 million increase for them. Tangible Code falls into the criteria. That would mean about a $360,000 increase for them. And then EBR also falls into the criteria, and that would be about a 2.8 increase for that district.
Okay, and just from a technical perspective, the simulations that you've run, you're going to run the simulations with the current MFP count as it is and then compare it, and the difference would be according to this formula, or are you going to adjust the student count and rerun the simulation? Which way are you going to do it?
No, this will not impact what I call the running of the formula in level 3, other than the projection that we have out there right now as to the cost of the formula is probably a few dollars off because we're waiting for some final data. That's normal process during the year.
Right.
And so I don't expect each individual district's amounts to change very much. But we will compare that, finally, right before June 30th when we make the budget letter final. And, for example, Livingston would be entitled to 100% of whatever their difference was. Right now it's 4.2. I expect it to be, it might be a few less, maybe a few dollars more, but nothing significant. Same would go for the other two. We would do their comparison, and then we would give them 50% of whatever that loss
But
was.
the comparison will be with the actual student count versus the prior count, and look at the difference in it, or are you going to run it with an adjusted student count?
I'm not changing the way the formula is actually run. I'm only looking at their difference between the prior year and the current year. But the total formula will run.
So look at the total amount of money that would have been appropriated both ways, and then the difference, either the 50% or the 100%.
That's correct.
Depending upon. So Livingston falls under the 100%, and what about EBR?
EBR and tangible both fall into the 50% category.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other board members with questions or concerns? Any other comments you'd like to make on it? I'm going to ask the board to consider a little technical edit. If you look at the back of the last page of your packet, where it has the description of, how this would affect the military piece of it. With my previous military background, I see a potential problem here that I would like to offer to the board and see if someone would offer as a motion to change the wording slightly, where it says in the event of a deployment of an entire brigade of soldiers from so forth, I'd like to substitute in the event of a deployment of a brigade combat team or a combination of units of approximately the same size. Because the way the deployment process works is, first of all, the entire brigade is from Fort Polk is not leaving. That's the 3rd Brigade of the 10th Mountain Division. It's only a brigade combat team, which is a slightly smaller unit, probably 500-600 folks less. But at the same time that they do that, historically what they do is they grab units from other folks that are on the post there, but that are not necessarily associated with that brigade combat team. So I think for safety's sake, we should say in the event of employment of a brigade combat team or a combination of units of approximately the same size. And then further down where it says anticipated to result in at least a 10% reduction in students, I'd like to suggest that we say anticipated to result in at least a 10% reduction in military connected students. And that's a slight modification, but somewhat important. Mr. Davis?
I think those are great edits. Would we need a motion now to amend the existing motion?
Can we just accept the amendment on the original motion? I made the motion, Mr. Davis seconded it. Can we just accept that amendment?
You could do that.
Since you made the motion, are you willing to do that?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, so we have a motion to amend the original motion to include the language I just read and a second on that motion. Any discussion, board members? I'd like the record to note that Mr. Garvey brought his esteemed knowledge to the table here Yes, ma'am.
And just for the record, in case some people don't quite understand, these students in the military installation that we're talking about have already been accounted for in the projected MFP. So this would not be an addition of funding in the MFP. It's those projections already in there as if those students were returning. So we would not be, by taking this, or passing this motion, we would not be adding to the projected cost by approving this portion of the amendment.
Any other board member like to comment? I'd like to add one slight one. The concern here is not just the students, it's also the impact on the district in terms of what happens to their staff. Because if their MFP suddenly gets adjusted at the beginning of the year to reflect a lower number of students there, then it's likely that it would cause them to lay off some staff and those folks would go other places. And then suddenly, 9 months later, when the brigade combat team returns, now all of a sudden they're now looking for people that they just laid off several months before. So I think that's the real part of it. It's not just the students, it's also the effect on staff and on the district. So, anyone else have any comment? Any objection to the motion? Do we have public comment? I'm sorry. I wasn't going to let them talk today. I'm kidding. Mr. Richard. And he is speaking to support the recommendation.
Good morning, Scott Richard, Louisiana School Boards Association. Certainly appreciate the efforts of you all coming together for such an important purpose on short notice. We completely understand that this is another step in the process of prioritizing K-12 funding for public schools in Louisiana, and echo the comments of Superintendent White earlier today, understanding that in order to see this through, that we would hope from the school board's perspective that not only BESE, but the Department of Education, the governor's office, leaders in the legislature, and all people interested in K-12 education would work collaboratively and together, harmoniously, to move this through the rest of the process, the very long process that will play out in the coming weeks across the street at the Capitol. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Michael Falk, representing the Louisiana Association of School Superintendents, wishes to speak in support.
Thank you, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the board. On behalf of the school systems, I know that have been impacted. I had a lot of conversations at the beginning of the school year with the impact and how all this was going to play out. And I think that this is a very positive step. It recognizes that it was something beyond everyone's control, and it's going to help those school systems keep their head above, I hate to say that, but head above water, and do some things that they've been having to curtail because of the impact, negative impact that they receive. So we would appreciate your support of this resolution going forward. We would be speaking to the legislature in support of it.
Thank you. Mr. Rick Winslow, Livingston Parish Public Schools, wishes to speak in support.
Members, Superintendent White, let me tell you, it's been a long ordeal. I am obviously in support of this as well. As Superintendent White said, we're still trying to figure out numbers. We've got people returning every day. We have evidences that building are still going on in our parish, which those houses are being filled with families and students. And it's very difficult for us to overcome a disaster that we went through where we lost students, which in a very interesting manner, we ended up in around 570 students. But the reality is it could have been a whole lot worse. But the people of Livingston Parish are resolved, and they're definitely in support of public education in Livingston Parish, and they are returning. We hear it constantly. Many of them are just waiting on their homes to be rebuilt. We're hoping that comes to fruition pretty quickly. Many of the realtors I've spoke to, many of the developers I've spoke to, they're continuing to build and they're continuing to sell. You can see it in the paper. It always comments about Livingston Parish still selling homes even after this disaster. It's an interesting twist. We've seen some of the schools. Obviously, Denham Springs is affected severely. It's a monumental battle just to get those schools back to where we need to get them back to financially. And the burden of the staff funding is also a concern to us. And so if we can alleviate that concern so we can get through this and continue to educate the students of Livingston Parish, I would appreciate it. And so I would state that I am in total support of this. And I want to add one thing. We've got 2 schools, even in Denham Springs, that we've had higher kindergarten registration this year than we've had in the past, which tells us they're coming back. And so I would echo all the comments that were made, and I am in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, any other board members like to speak or anything before we take a vote? All right, we have the motion before us, and no further discussion. Is there any objection to the motion? Motion carries, and I believe that's the end of the item. Meeting is adjourned.